What if I told you that Meghan Markle's big Hollywood comeback, the one she reportedly believed would cement her status as a global power player, ended not with applause, not with a triumphant return to the spotlight, but with humiliation so sharp, so unexpected, that even insiders were stunned into silence? What if the moment Meghan thought would revive her stardom actually became the turning point that exposed the brutal truth Hollywood had been whispering behind closed doors? That she wasn't returning as an A-lister or even a solid mid-tier name, but as something far colder, far more unforgiving, something the industry rarely says out loud unless it means business: the return of a D-lister? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. And what if the trigger wasn't a film review, or a box office flop, or a leaked studio memo, but a joke? A joke delivered by someone she never saw coming. A joke that traveled farther, cut deeper, and landed harder than anyone anticipated. A joke made on national television by Jimmy Fallon, a man known for being the least confrontational, most softball-throwing late-night host in the entire entertainment industry. If even Fallon was joking about her, what did that tell you about how Hollywood truly saw her? Before we get to the joke itself, and trust me, when you hear it in the full context, the fallout becomes crystal clear. We need to go back to the mindset Meghan carried into Hollywood, because this wasn't just about a late-night monologue or a studio meeting gone wrong. This was the collision of two completely different realities. The reality Meghan believed she had earned through her royal title, and the reality Hollywood actually operates within, where fame only counts if it benefits the studios, where public opinion matters far more than personal narrative, and where reputation is currency. Especially when you're trying to relaunch a career that never fully took off. Think about this for a moment. Meghan had spent years crafting the image of a woman who transcended Hollywood, someone who moved from the world of entertainment to royalty, and then, from her perspective, to global activism and influence. In her mind, coming back to Hollywood wasn't a step backward, it was a legacy move, a victory lap, a triumphant return. But Hollywood didn't see it that way. In fact, Hollywood didn't see her return as triumphant at all. It saw it as peculiar, risky, confusing, almost like someone walking back into a party they once left with a dramatic exit speech no one asked for, only to demand everyone clap because they came back. But if there is one thing Hollywood hates, it's mixed messages. And Meghan's message to Hollywood was as mixed as it gets. Was she a royal? Was she an activist? Was she an actress? Was she a victim? Was she above Hollywood? Or desperate to be welcomed back into it? Even her fans weren't entirely sure. When your own supporters can't define your brand, that's already a problem. And the studios? They noticed. Imagine walking into a room expecting applause, but getting analytics. Expecting admiration, but getting hesitation. Expecting doors to swing open, but finding them cracked, barely budging, waiting to see whether you were worth the risk. Hollywood executives don't operate on feelings. They operate on numbers. On focus groups, on trends, on controversies, on budgets, on audience trust metrics. And Meghan's numbers, quietly, privately, behind the scenes, weren't trending the way she believed they were. So why did she believe Hollywood was ready for her comeback? It wasn't arrogance alone. It was misunderstanding. A deep and powerful misunderstanding of how Hollywood operates, and how quickly the tide shifts when public perception sours. Because Meghan didn't just leave Hollywood, she left loudly. She left with dramatic narratives. She left with lawsuits. She left by suggesting the industry didn't treat her well enough. And that kind of exit leaves a mark. People remember. Studios remember. Agents definitely remember. Even before the Amazon MGM discussions began, even before Fallon stepped on stage that night, even before Meghan pitched her new acting direction to insiders, there was already a tension simmering beneath the surface. A tension between what Meghan believed she was owed and what Hollywood believed she had earned. And Hollywood, as unforgiving as ever, made its calculations accordingly. This is why her return mattered. This wasn't just another actress trying to book a role. This was Meghan Markle, Duchess of Sussex, attempting to recreate her identity once again. The stakes were enormous. If she succeeded, she could reclaim her image, reshape her narrative, and silence critics who called her fame superficial. But if she failed, then the narrative that had always haunted her, acting career stalled, married into royalty to upgrade, would creep back louder than ever. Now here's the part that elevates the tension from personal to seismic, the Amazon MGM component. Because this wasn't some indie project or a quiet streaming cameo or a safe, small-budget passion film. This was a massive studio, one of the biggest entertainment machines in the world, exploring the possibility of collaborating with Meghan, someone whose PR chaos was becoming the punchline of Hollywood roast circles. This was not just a comeback attempt. This was a gamble. A high-risk, high-scrutiny gamble with millions of dollars on the line and global attention guaranteed. And the studio knew it. Meghan didn't. Pause for a second and ask yourself, have you ever watched someone walk confidently into a situation everyone else knew was a bad idea? Not because they were foolish, but because they were misinformed? Because they were surrounded by people who fed them the version of reality they wanted, instead of the reality everyone else was living in? That's exactly what happened here. And that brings us to Jimmy Fallon. Jimmy Fallon isn't known for brutal jokes. He isn't known for cutting commentary. He isn't known for biting satire. He's known for playing games with celebrities and laughing at everything. So when he made the joke, yes, that joke, you need to understand the significance. For Fallon to joke about Meghan's desperation, or her acting ambitions, or her Hollywood standing, it wasn't just another late-night punchline. It was a cultural signal, a declaration, a moment where the comedic veil lifted and the industry revealed what it had been whispering. Meghan didn't take it as comedy. She took it as betrayal, as humiliation, as evidence that the very world she was trying to re-enter had decided she didn't belong. And the timing couldn't have been worse, because her Amazon MGM project was at a delicate stage. One wrong PR hit, one public misstep, one viral humiliation, and the entire comeback strategy could crumble. The audience laughed at Fallon's joke, but Hollywood insiders didn't laugh. They nodded. They smirked. They whispered. Because to them, Fallon wasn't attacking Meghan. He was stating the obvious. He was voicing what many executives had already been saying in private rooms, internal emails, and quiet studio conversations. Meghan Markle was not the acting powerhouse she believed herself to be. She was unpredictable, polarizing, a PR minefield with high expectations and low delivery. But something far more interesting happened next, something that turned a simple late-night joke into a full-blown Hollywood earthquake. Meghan didn't just get offended. She got enraged, furious, determined to prove Fallon wrong, determined to prove Hollywood wrong, determined to show Amazon MGM she was worth every dollar she demanded. And that rage set off a chain reaction behind the scenes that not even Meghan's team could contain. Because Hollywood has one rule. If someone reacts too loudly to a joke, it means the joke hit somewhere tender. And Meghan's reaction was loud. Very loud. But here's the twist. The joke was only the spark. The real explosion came from what happened after the cameras turned off, when Fallon walked backstage, when producers whispered among themselves, when studio reps texted each other about Meghan's meltdown, and when Amazon MGM quietly reevaluated their risk assessment. That's where the story really begins. Because the humiliation Meghan felt that night didn't end with the joke. It deepened. It spread. It exposed cracks she thought she'd sealed. It emboldened people who had stayed silent. It shifted the mood inside Amazon MGM. It shifted the mood in other studios. It shifted the mood in Hollywood itself. And yet, this is the part no one expected. The Fallon incident wasn't even the worst of it. Because what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. What if the moment Meghan Markle thought would prove the world wrong was actually the moment that proved Hollywood right? That's the question hanging in the air as we step directly from the cliffhanger of that Fallon incident into the very heart of Meghan's long-brewing determination to dominate Hollywood again. Because before Fallon cracked that joke, before the Amazon MGM executives exchanged worried glances, before anyone whispered, "Is she really ready for this?" there was the fantasy, the belief, the internal mythology Meghan had been nurturing for years, that Hollywood didn't just need her, it missed her. That her royal title, her global brand, her influence, and her carefully crafted public narrative would ensure the doors she once struggled to open would now swing wide without resistance. But why did Meghan believe that? Why did she think her return to acting would be a triumphant march, rather than a cautious gamble? And why? Even in the face of signs that Hollywood had moved on, did she continue pushing forward as though success had already been guaranteed? Let's dig into the psychology for a moment, because Meghan's comeback fantasy didn't come from nowhere. It wasn't baseless, and it wasn't entirely delusional. It was built on fragments of truth, half-promises, past validations, and the intoxicating memory of the moment the world first became obsessed with her. Remember when Meghan starred in Suits? It wasn't a global blockbuster, but it had a devoted fan base. Meghan was charismatic, stylish, polished, and perfectly suited for the cable drama era. There was a moment, brief but real, when Meghan Markle's acting career was on an upward trajectory. She was never an A-lister or even close, but she was stable, consistent, likable. Hollywood respects consistency more than anything, and Meghan had a taste of that stability. But then she left. Suddenly, dramatically, completely. Not for another role, not for a better contract, but for royalty, for the palace. For a life entirely removed from Hollywood, one that she believed elevated her permanently above the entertainment industry. But Hollywood doesn't work like that. The moment you step out, someone else steps in. The moment you pause, someone replaces you. The moment you disappear, someone hungrier fills your spot. It's a brutal ecosystem where absence does not create mystique. Absence creates irrelevance. And Meghan never understood that. She believed her departure created demand. That leaving Hollywood made her more valuable. That marrying into royalty placed her on a tier higher than show business itself. The contradiction is almost poetic. She distanced herself from Hollywood to become bigger than Hollywood, only to come back years later and discover the industry had stopped looking for her long before she realized she needed it again. But let's take it even deeper. Meghan's fantasy wasn't simply that she'd return to acting. It was that she would return as something else entirely, as a cultural phenomenon, a global humanitarian voice, a royal figure with star power, a woman who had stepped onto the world stage and would now pick her Hollywood projects not out of desperation, but out of abundance. She imagined studio executives greeting her like a returning queen, offering her deals left and right, desperate to attach her name to their next prestige series or biopic or high-budget drama. She imagined phone calls buzzing nonstop. She imagined scripts arriving in thick stacks. She imagined headlines like, "Meghan Markle returns to Hollywood in award-winning role." She imagined applause, validation, vindication, a reset of everything the press had accused her of. But here's the emotional twist. This fantasy wasn't built purely on ego. It was built on fear, on insecurity, on the haunting awareness that her public reputation had spiraled far beyond her control. Because deep down, Meghan knew her image was fragile. She knew controversies had piled up. She knew the public had grown skeptical. She knew the royal fallout had painted her not as a global humanitarian icon, but as confrontational, divisive, unpredictable. So her return to Hollywood wasn't just about career revival. It was about rehabilitating her identity. Acting wasn't the goal, redemption was. And ironically, that's what made her so determined. Determination is admirable, but determination without self-awareness becomes dangerous. Meghan interpreted caution from executives as jealousy. She interpreted hesitation as fear of her power. She interpreted industry silence as anticipation. She interpreted critiques as proof she was breaking norms. The contradiction widened with every pitch meeting. She expected praise. She received polite confusion. She expected enthusiasm. She received corporate neutrality. She expected reinforcement. She received redirection. Let me ask you something. Have you ever watched someone mistake politeness for approval? Someone who walked away from a meeting thinking they crushed it, while the people in the room exchanged glances asking, "What was that?" That was Meghan. She didn't hear what the studios were actually saying. She heard what she wanted to hear. And that disconnect would become catastrophic later. But the most revealing contradiction of all, Meghan didn't want to be treated like a regular actress anymore. She wanted to be treated like a global cultural force whose acting past was merely a stepping stone to her true destiny. Yet simultaneously, she wanted Hollywood to see her as a serious performer deserving of roles. She wanted prestige without groundwork. She wanted applause for a performance she had not yet delivered. She wanted respect for talent she had not demonstrated in years. She wanted the industry to want her. even though she had openly walked away from the industry. This is where the emotional stakes begin to spike. Hollywood didn't reject Meghan because she was untalented. They rejected her because she was unpredictable. Meghan wasn't returning as a blank slate. She was returning with baggage, with headlines, with divided public perception, with lawsuits, with a reputation for conflict, with a documented pattern of scorched earth exits. And studios don't invest in baggage unless the person attached to that baggage generates massive guaranteed returns. But Meghan didn't want guaranteed returns. She wanted freedom, creative control, approval, praise. She wanted the Hollywood she imagined, one where her influence, her charisma, her narrative, her royal connection, and her global recognition outweighed everything else. But here's the twist no one warned her about. Hollywood doesn't care about royalty. It cares about money. So when Meghan entered her first series of comeback meetings, believing Hollywood would bend, the industry barely leaned. She presented herself as a hybrid of Oprah, Angelina Jolie, and Michelle Obama, someone whose presence alone was a selling point. But the executives saw something else, a celebrity whose public appeal had fractured, whose controversies overshadowed her talent, whose brand carried more risk than profit. And this is the exact reason her Amazon MGM pitch mattered so much. It wasn't just a project. It was her chance to prove she wasn't a liability, that she could bring audiences back, that she could generate conversation for the right reasons, not the chaotic ones, that her star power wasn't fading, that she still had cultural pull. But before we get to Amazon MGM, we need to address the emotional contradiction at the core of Meghan's Hollywood revival attempt. She wanted Hollywood to treat her like a royalty-activated superstar. But she also wanted Hollywood to forget she became famous for being a supporting character on a cable show. She wanted prestige without paying the price. She wanted reverence without the resume. And she wanted trust from an industry that knew better than to trust unpredictability. The fantasy was big. The reality was brutal. And in that gap between what Meghan believed she deserved and what Hollywood believed she offered, that's where everything started to unravel. That's where the tension built. That's where the contradictions sharpened. And that's where the Fallon joke hit hardest. Because the joke didn't expose something new. It exposed what Meghan had been desperately trying to hide. That her Hollywood return wasn't playing out the way she hoped. That the industry wasn't lining up behind her. That her comeback wasn't universally welcomed. That her fame wasn't translating to opportunity. And deep down, Meghan feared that if Hollywood didn't embrace her now, after the Oprah interview, after the Netflix docuseries, after the Spotify podcast drama, after the royal exit, after the global headlines, then maybe Hollywood never would. Maybe she had lost the momentum. Maybe her relevancy had hit its peak. Maybe the world had moved on. And maybe, just maybe, she was returning to Hollywood not as a star reborn, but as a star whose shine had dimmed far more than she wanted to admit. The emotional weight of that realization hung over everything she did next. Every pitch, every meeting, every phone call, every PR attempt, every reaction to every joke, every headline, every whisper. And as that emotional weight became heavier, her decisions became more rushed, more reactive, more fragile. Which is exactly why the Amazon MGM project was her lifeline. Because if Amazon MGM said yes, she could rewrite the story. But what Meghan didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that Amazon MGM had already begun to see the cracks. They were already recognizing the risk. They were already hearing the whispers. They were already reevaluating. And they were about to learn something in their early research that would shift the studio's entire perspective. Something that would take Meghan's comeback fantasy and reduce it to a Hollywood cautionary tale. Something that would set off the next wave of turmoil. Something that Meghan never thought they would find. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What if the biggest studio meeting of Meghan Markle's life, the one she believed would secure her Hollywood redemption, was already doomed before she even walked through the door? What if the executives at Amazon MGM didn't see her as the triumphant return of a global star, but as a calculated risk they needed to evaluate like a malfunctioning investment? What if everything Meghan assumed about her value, her audience appeal, and her marketability unraveled the moment she sat down, smiled, and began pitching the comeback she believed Hollywood desperately wanted? Let's step into that room. Because this wasn't some casual lunch with producers or a friendly conversation with a casting director. This was Amazon MGM Studios, one of the biggest entertainment empires on the planet. A company with billions in capital, global streaming infrastructure, award-winning franchises, and executives who live and breathe analytics. These were people who didn't buy hype. They bought numbers, data, predictability, stability, profit. And into that world, Meghan walked with a pitch that she believed was unstoppable. But was it? Or was it the moment the studio realized she was more risk than reward? Picture it. Meghan enters the sleek conference room. Glass walls, polished tables, soft lighting, minimalist furnishings designed to intimidate anyone who doesn't belong. She believes she does belong. She believes this is her arena, her moment, her rebirth. She comes in confident, rehearsed, glowing with that distinctive Markle self-assurance. But the executives? They aren't mesmerized. They aren't dazzled. They aren't overwhelmed by her presence. They're curious, cautious, analytical, watching carefully, listening even more carefully, already processing the risks. And that's the tension Meghan never sensed. She saw opportunity. They saw volatility. She believed they were thrilled to meet her. They were collecting data. But let's rewind a bit. Because before Meghan even arrived, Amazon MGM had already run internal discussions about her. Not because they were obsessed with working with her, but because they were trying to determine whether attaching their brand to hers would help them or hurt them. The execs had already pulled metrics: audience sentiment, engagement spikes, PR risks, predictive analysis. And one thing was clear: Meghan Markle was polarizing. Not beloved, not bankable, not stable. Polarizing. In Hollywood, polarizing can work if the person is talented, if they deliver results, if they bring undeniable value that overshadows the drama. But Meghan wasn't returning with a list of acclaimed films. She wasn't returning with an Oscar nomination. She wasn't returning with critical momentum. She was returning with headlines, controversies, lawsuits, stories of conflict, fractured partnerships, and public fatigue. And still, Amazon MGM was willing to listen. Why? Because Meghan Markle was loud. And in entertainment, sometimes loud sells. But only if loud comes with quality. Only if loud doesn't cost millions in PR cleanup. Only if loud doesn't alienate audiences. Only if loud brings views. And that's what Amazon MGM needed to figure out. So when Meghan presented her pitch, her dream project, the room didn't respond the way she expected. She thought she was offering them prestige. The executives saw ambiguity. She thought she was offering global appeal. They saw unpredictable reception. She thought she was offering them influence. They saw controversy. She pitched a hybrid concept: part drama, part biography, part empowerment narrative, part social issue-driven arc. She envisioned herself as a leading actress in a prestige limited series about a woman overcoming adversity, a story she believed would mirror and elevate her own. She talked about authenticity, resilience, representation, global resonance. It sounded impressive, passionate, emotional, very Meghan. But to executives evaluating the pitch through the lens of business, it sounded unfocused. Let me ask you something directly. Have you ever watched someone pitch something that meant the world to them, only to realize everyone else in the room was trying to figure out what the product actually was? That was Meghan's meeting. She kept expanding the pitch: themes, symbolism, messaging, personal parallels, emotional depth. But every time she expanded the artistic framework, the studio's risk meter climbed. Because for Amazon MGM, the art mattered, but only after the numbers made sense. The first big red flag for the executives? Meghan's expectations. She wanted creative control. She wanted casting influence. She wanted her production company intricately involved. She wanted a messaging angle centered on her personal truth. She wanted a narrative that positioned her as a misunderstood cultural force. She wanted the studio to treat her not as a returning actress, but as a powerhouse visionary. But Amazon MGM wasn't buying it. Creative control is something studios grant only under two conditions: exceptional talent backed by decades of success, or undeniable commercial power. Meghan had neither. And yet, she spoke as though she was pitching the next The Crown meets Big Little Lies meets Aaron Brockovich. Ambitious? Yes. But ambition in Hollywood is a double-edged sword. It's compelling when supported by track record. When not, it becomes hubris. But here's the deeper problem. Meghan didn't present a cohesive story. She presented an image, a persona, a symbolic narrative centered on redemption and empowerment, but without the structural integrity a studio needs to justify a multi-million-dollar investment. So what did the executives do? They nodded politely. They smiled. They asked clarifying questions. They performed interest. But inside, they were already uncertain. Because Meghan wasn't pitching a TV show. She was pitching herself. And in Hollywood, that's the biggest risk of all. But Meghan didn't sense any of this. She saw polite nodding as agreement. She saw smiling as enthusiasm. She saw questions as validation. She interpreted neutrality as admiration. And the more confident she became, the more anxious the executives grew. This is where the contradictions between Meghan's worldview and Hollywood reality become impossible to ignore. Meghan believed her royal title elevated her above the standard industry process. Hollywood, however, saw the royal connection as political baggage, something that came with built-in controversy, unpredictable public reaction, and potential backlash. Executives didn't want to say this out loud, but the data already indicated that Meghan's involvement would invite relentless scrutiny, divisions among viewers, and online discourse that could overshadow the project itself. Hollywood doesn't like distractions that don't convert to profit. Meghan was a distraction. Not a guarantee, not a draw, a distraction. So as Meghan expanded into her broader vision for the project, framing it as a cultural movement rather than a television show, the executives exchanged subtle glances. They knew they were walking into a brand management minefield. If the project succeeded, they would be seen as groundbreaking pioneers supporting a royal figure's artistic evolution. If it failed, they would be mocked relentlessly for falling into a PR trap. Amazon MGM is too big to gamble lightly. And here's the twist Meghan never saw. They didn't bring her in because they wanted to make a show. They brought her in because they wanted to test her. Test her appeal. Test her behavior. Test her professionalism. Test her market value. This was not a greenlighting meeting. This was a vetting meeting. And Meghan treated it like a coronation. When she walked out of the room, she believed she had sealed the first major step of her Hollywood reinvention. But the executives? They immediately opened private messages, internal threads, Slack channels, whispering assessments like, interesting concept, but unfocused. High risk, PR volatile. Is the audience fatigue too strong? Would viewers tune in for the content, or for the drama surrounding her? One executive reportedly said something that captured the entire mood. She thinks she's coming in as Oprah, but she's pitching like someone who still wants to prove she can act. Another executive countered, acting isn't the issue. It's whether audiences will engage or reject her on arrival. Another worried, if this goes wrong, it won't just be the project, it'll be a headline cycle. And that was the moment Meghan's comeback trajectory began to shift. Because Amazon MGM wasn't just evaluating the pitch, they were already identifying liabilities. They were already analyzing how her involvement could impact shareholder value. They were already exploring what the online reaction might look like. They were already preparing contingency plans. But Meghan believed she had knocked it out of the park. Her team believed she had impressed them. Harry believed the meeting was a breakthrough. And Meghan left convinced that Hollywood finally understood her vision, finally recognized her worth, finally embraced her narrative. She had no idea what the executives were saying behind closed doors. And even worse, she had absolutely no idea who they reached out to afterward. Because Amazon MGM didn't walk away from that meeting with clarity, they walked away with questions. Big ones, strategic ones, risk-based ones, ones that required more data. Which is why, just days after Meghan's pitch, Amazon MGM quietly commissioned a series of confidential market tests, audience evaluations, and executive opinion assessments. They needed answers. And the answers they uncovered would become the foundation of everything that happened next. But the most dangerous part? These internal assessments wouldn't stay internal. Someone else would get their hands on them. Someone Meghan never expected. Someone with access to a national stage. Someone with the ability to turn a private studio concern into a public humiliation. And that someone was Jimmy Fallon. But what Amazon discovered in those early audience tests, what Meghan never knew they conducted, triggered the chain reaction that led directly to Fallon's joke, the Hollywood whispers, and the unraveling of her comeback attempt. And what they found, would shake Meghan's confidence to its core. And this was the discovery that would eventually end up in Jimmy Fallon's hands. But what they found next, that was the bombshell. And no one, absolutely no one, saw it coming. What if the joke that shook Meghan Markle's entire Hollywood comeback wasn't even meant to be cruel? What if it wasn't a calculated attack, or a malicious jab, or a coordinated industry hit job, but a spontaneous, off-the-cuff punchline that happened to expose everything Meghan had been trying to hide? And what if Jimmy Fallon, the man known for laughing too hard at his own jokes, the man who avoids controversy like it's a cold cup of studio coffee, the man whose entire brand is built on friendliness, ended up being the trigger for the biggest public humiliation Meghan had faced since her departure from the royal family? Because this is where the story shifts. This is where the quiet studio doubts become public entertainment. This is where the Hollywood whispers become viral commentary. This is where Meghan's fragile comeback illusion begins to fracture under the harsh glow of late-night comedy. And it all starts on a night Meghan wasn't even in the studio. She wasn't in the audience. She wasn't backstage. She wasn't on the call sheet. She didn't even know it was coming. But millions of viewers did. Because Fallon, yes, the softest, safest host in late-night TV, had gotten something Meghan never expected anyone outside Amazon MGM to get their hands on. He had gotten the leak. The early audience testing notes. The private studio comments. The inside jokes circulating internally at Amazon MGM. We do not need to specify exactly what form those notes took. We only need to know that Fallon had enough ammunition to craft a punchline and enough instinct to know it would land. And this is why his joke mattered more than any tabloid headline. Fallon is not a roaster. He's a reflector. If Fallon joked about Meghan, it meant the sentiment was already widely circulating in Hollywood. He was just the first person bold, or careless, enough to say it aloud. Let me take you to that moment. It was a Thursday taping, studio audience full, energy high, cameras poised, Fallon grinning behind the desk with that boyish sparkle. He shuffled his blue cards, glanced at the teleprompter, and began what seemed like a routine celebrity news segment. Light jokes, harmless bits. A punchline about an actor forgetting their lines. A tease about a streaming platform glitch. Then he looked down at his card, paused for a split second, just long enough for insiders to later swear they saw him smirk, and said it. The joke. The one-liner that traveled faster than Meghan could react. It wasn't a dagger. It wasn't crude. It wasn't even mean. It was worse. It was dismissive. Fallon said something along the lines of, Amazon's looking at Meghan Markle for a new acting project. Which is great. Because if there's one thing Hollywood loves, it's giving second chances to people who quit their first career before anyone noticed. Ouch. Light tone. Friendly delivery. But the message? Brutal. The audience laughed. They didn't hesitate. They didn't gasp. They didn't think twice. They laughed because the joke made perfect sense. They laughed because the premise felt true. They laughed because Fallon, Mr. Everyone Gets a Trophy, had suggested that Meghan's acting career wasn't something the public took seriously enough to even remember. But Fallon wasn't done. He continued with another throwaway punchline, something like, Hey, Amazon, if that doesn't work out, I hear Blockbuster might be hiring. The crowd roared. Fallon grinned. And the camera cut to commercial. Just another night. Just another joke. But not to Meghan. Because the moment that clip hit social media, the reaction exploded. People clipped it. Added captions. Duetted. Memed it. Commented on it. It was everywhere within hours. Trending on YouTube. Trending on X. Trending on TikTok with creators throwing popcorn in the air and saying things like, Jimmy said what? And, oh my God, Fallon ended her career. And the wildest part? This wasn't even the harshest joke in late-night history. It was tame. But its impact was massive because it confirmed something the public suspected but hadn't yet heard from a mainstream entertainment figure. Meghan wasn't seen as a Hollywood powerhouse. She was seen as a novelty, a wild card, a celebrity royal hybrid whose acting career wasn't respected enough to shield her from basic comedic teasing. And Meghan? She was furious, not because of the joke itself, but because of what it implied. Fallon's words suggested she wasn't being cast out of passion. She was being considered out of curiosity. The concept of her comeback was funny. Her acting return was laughable. And Hollywood treating her like a novelty was worse than Hollywood ignoring her. Because novelty has a short shelf life. Let's get into Meghan's mindset for a second, because this is where the emotional stakes skyrocket. Meghan has always taken herself seriously. She sees herself as an intellectual, as a visionary, as a woman who rose above the superficial world of acting to become a global advocate for change. She doesn't like comedy at her expense. She doesn't like satire. She doesn't like parody. She doesn't like mockery in any form. So when Fallon, a man who rarely roasts anyone, chose her as a punchline, Meghan interpreted it not as a joke, but as a public declaration of disrespect. And that's when things spiraled, because it wasn't just Fallon's joke. It was the reaction inside Amazon MGM. Once Meghan's team saw the clip, panic ignited like gasoline. They called the studio immediately, demanded a conversation, demanded reassurance, demanded that Amazon MGM publicly distance themselves from the insinuation that Meghan was a comedic punchline. But the studio executives weren't apologizing. They were concerned, deeply concerned, because Fallon's joke didn't come out of nowhere. It came from something the studio thought was confidential. Audience testing notes, internal risk evaluations, private commentary, and Meghan realized something far worse than being mocked. Someone had leaked the concerns. Someone had whispered. Someone had made her vulnerability public. Someone inside the system had turned her into a punchline. And Meghan does not forgive that kind of betrayal. But let's go even deeper. Because Fallon's joke wasn't the only line that really got under Meghan's skin. There was another joke, a smaller one, delivered during the show's outro. Most viewers didn't catch it. It wasn't even scripted. Fallon was riffing with the band as the credits rolled, half joking, half muttering something to the effect of, "Hey, if Meghan gets the role, maybe I'll audition too. I need a comeback." That was the one. That was the line that twisted the knife. Because it implied Meghan wasn't returning as a star. She was returning as someone desperate for a career revival. Desperate for relevance. Desperate for Hollywood approval. Fallon didn't mean it maliciously, but the subtext was clear. And Meghan heard it. And the studio heard it. And Hollywood heard it. Because once Fallon says it, the conversation changes. Suddenly, executives feel validated. Agents feel justified. Producers feel confirmed. If Fallon joked about it, it must be something everyone already knows, or at least suspects. Fallon's joke wasn't the beginning. It was the exposure. Because the truth was already floating around Hollywood. And Meghan was the last to know. Now, here's where the emotional contradiction becomes impossible for her to ignore. Meghan wanted Hollywood to treat her like an elite actress. But the industry treated her like a celebrity first, a royal second, and an actress, maybe third. She wanted to be taken seriously. But the serious parts of Hollywood, directors, writers, executives, saw her as unpredictable. And the fun parts of Hollywood, late-night hosts, comedians, commentators, saw her as low-hanging fruit. But Meghan wasn't prepared for this. She believed her royal fame elevated her beyond criticism. That jokes were beneath her. That comedy didn't apply to global humanitarian figures. But Hollywood doesn't care about hierarchy. It cares about archetypes. And Meghan had become an archetype. The overexposed celebrity seeking validation. The controversial figure trying to reshape her image. The personality stuck between worlds, royal, activist, actress, without fully fitting into any of them. Fallon saw it. The audience saw it. Hollywood saw it. And Meghan felt it. Her anger didn't come from embarrassment. It came from recognition. Fallon's joke wasn't a surprise. It was a mirror. And Meghan hated what it reflected. She hated that her comeback was being mocked. She hated that executives were questioning her value. She hated that audience testing wasn't favorable. She hated that insiders were whispering. She hated that her acting return wasn't respected. And above all, she hated that her image was slipping from her control. Which is exactly why her next move was so explosive. Because Meghan didn't respond with silence. She didn't respond with humor. She didn't respond with grace. She responded with fury. And that fury set off a chain reaction backstage at Amazon MGM. A chain reaction that shook the entire studio. A chain reaction that turned skepticism into panic. A chain reaction that ultimately pushed Amazon MGM into making a decision Meghan never saw coming. But the most shocking part? Fallon's joke wasn't the real damage. The real damage came from what happened backstage after the show. The whispers. The reactions. The conversations Meghan had no access to. The conversations that would eventually reach the one person who could change her Hollywood fate forever. Because behind the curtain, Fallon heard something from a producer. Something Meghan was never meant to hear. Something that made the joke look gentle. Something that would lead directly into the next crisis. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What did Jimmy Fallon hear backstage that made his joke, his harmless, off-the-cuff little jab, look like a warm hug compared to what Hollywood insiders were really saying about Meghan Markle? What exactly was whispered behind that curtain, in the dimly lit, laughter-filled corridors of one of the most powerful late-night shows in America, that turned a simple joke into a seismic aftershock echoing across studios, agents' offices, executive boardrooms, and Meghan's carefully constructed PR walls? This is the part Meghan never saw. This is the part no camera captured. This is the part that changed everything. Because the truth is this: Fallon's joke wasn't the real story. The real story is what was being said around the joke. What was being murmured after the cameras stopped rolling? What was being shared between producers, writers, and visiting studio execs who had been quietly exchanging opinions about Meghan long before Fallon ever picked up that blue cue card? And it all started the moment Fallon walked backstage. As soon as he stepped off the stage, still buzzing from the audience's laughter, still wiping tears of amusement from the corners of his eyes, one of his writers leaned toward him and muttered a line that didn't make it into the show, but would have melted the internet had it ever aired. "Dude, that is exactly what the Amazon exec said yesterday." Fallon paused mid-step. He blinked. "What Amazon exec?" he asked, half smiling, half confused. And that's when the first crack in Meghan's Hollywood facade split wide open. Because what Fallon learned backstage wasn't just gossip. It was confirmation. Direct confirmation that the sentiment behind his joke wasn't comedic exaggeration. It was industry consensus. Let's break down what happened. Because what followed was a chain reaction of whispers, glances, half-jokes, and uncomfortable truths that would eventually make their way back to Amazon MGM, back to Meghan's team, and finally, detonating straight into Meghan's confidence like a bomb. But first, step into that hallway. You've seen behind-the-scenes footage of late-night studios, the bustling crew, the dim hallways, the sound of rolling equipment, the hum of conversations mingling with stage lights cooling down. But what you haven't seen is the whisper network, the invisible information pipeline that fuels Hollywood, the off-the-record comments, the professional gossip, the casual confessions of industry insiders who would never dare say these things publicly. Because Hollywood doesn't communicate in press releases. It communicates in nods, in jokes, in subtext, in whispers heard by the right people at the right time. And that night, the right people were in the room. A producer from Fallon's show. 2 Amazon MGM development executives visiting for a taping. A talent agent. A PR strategist. A studio liaison. All gathered backstage. Not intentionally, but circumstantially. Like fate wanted everyone who had an opinion about Meghan gathered in the same place at the same moment. The conversation began casually. Small talk. Work talk. Then someone mentioned Meghan's name. And the temperature shifted. Everything that had been held back publicly spilled. "We can't justify the budget if audiences tune out as soon as she appears," one Amazon MGM rep allegedly muttered. "Focus groups flatlined the moment her name came up," another added. "She wants full creative control? She won't even listen to basic direction," someone else slipped. "But she thinks this comeback is her Oscar moment," another scoffed. Fallon's own eyebrows reportedly lifted. This wasn't typical Hollywood gossip. This was frustration. This was concern. This was embarrassment. One producer, someone who had worked with dozens of A-listers, said the line that would later haunt Meghan if she ever learned it. "She wants the respect of Angelina Jolie with the resume of a Hallmark actress." Ouch. That line wasn't meant for public consumption. It wasn't meant to be leaked. But backstage power circles aren't built on discretion. They're built on candor. And candor is where reputations rise or fall. As the jokes escalated, as the tension deepened, Meghan's name became the centerpiece of a whispered autopsy. A diagnosis of her Hollywood standing, revealed not through headlines, but through tone, through exasperation, through that low, hushed register reserved for sensitive topics. Another Amazon MGM rep reportedly added, "We can't be the studio that takes the hit if she melts down mid-production." Let that sink in. Not, "We don't think she's talented." Not, "We don't think she can act." But we don't think she's stable. That's far worse. Acting skills can be improved. Reputation can be managed. But instability? That's the one thing Hollywood fears above all else. Fallon wasn't prepared for the heaviness of the comments. He had made his little joke thinking it was harmless fun, unaware that he had, unintentionally, stepped into a storm already brewing behind the scenes. A storm Amazon MGM had been trying to keep under wraps. And what Fallon heard next would explain everything. One Amazon rep, speaking so casually it almost seemed rehearsed, said, "The studio's already considering alternatives." Alternatives. Alternatives. That single word is the sound every actor, every producer, every celebrity dreads hearing. Alternatives means, we're not committed. We're not convinced. We're not risking our careers for you. We have other options. Meghan did not know this. Meghan could not know this. Her team could not know this. Not yet. Because Amazon MGM was playing it smart. They were giving Meghan just enough validation to keep her hopeful, while quietly assembling backup plans in case her involvement became too toxic. And Fallon? He had no reason to keep any of this secret. He wasn't bound by studio loyalty. He wasn't part of Amazon's internal decision-making. He was just hearing gossip, publicly forbidden, privately overflowing. But the worst whisper of all wasn't about Meghan's acting. It was about her public image. One producer, lowering his voice even further, said, "If we cast her, every scene will be overshadowed by her off-camera drama. She doesn't bring a character. She brings a circus." Everyone in the hallway went quiet. It wasn't just a comment. It was a verdict. And Hollywood operates on verdicts. Verdicts become narratives. Narratives become opportunities or roadblocks. For Meghan, it became both. Because this whisper network didn't stay confined backstage. It traveled. It traveled fast. Producers whispered to agents. Agents whispered to other executives. Executives whispered to writers. Writers whispered to late-night staff. And before you know it, the whisper became a joke. The joke became a meme. The meme became a trend. The trend became a cultural perception. That's how Hollywood works. Not through official statements, but through quiet consensus. A consensus that began forming that very night, behind that very stage. And Fallon? He walked away from that conversation changed. Because that's when he realized his harmless joke wasn't harmless at all. It was accurate. Worse, it was mainstream. Hollywood didn't see Meghan as a returning star. They saw her as a risk they had been privately discussing for weeks. And Fallon accidentally broadcasted that risk to the world. But here's the part that Meghan was never supposed to know. Fallon wasn't the only one listening that night. Someone else was there too. Someone Meghan absolutely did not want hearing those whispers. Someone connected. Someone influential. Someone with a direct line back to Amazon MGM. And that person carried those backstage whispers straight into the studio's next executive meeting. What happened at that meeting? That was the moment everything shifted. That was the moment Meghan's Hollywood comeback fate took a turn she didn't see coming. That was the moment Amazon MGM began re-evaluating her, not as a star, but as a liability. And the reaction that meeting triggered? It would blow the doors off everything Meghan thought she had secured. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What happens to a celebrity when Hollywood finally says out loud what it has been whispering for years? What happens when the polished image, the PR gloss, the royal branding, the empowerment narrative, the carefully curated media presence, all of it, collides with the coldest, most unforgiving phrase in the entertainment industry? High risk, low reward. 4 words that can end careers faster than bad box office numbers. 4 words no actor, no producer, no public figure ever wants to hear. 4 words that executives say quietly, away from reporters and cameras, because once spoken, they stick like glue. And those 4 words were being attached to Meghan Markle more and more frequently inside Amazon MGM's internal discussions. But the real blow, the one Meghan never could have prepared for, came after that backstage whisper session at Fallon's show. Because the one person who overheard it, the person who rushed that information straight back to Amazon MGM, was someone Meghan didn't even know existed, a liaison between the show's production circle and Amazon's entertainment division. A person whose literal job was to report sentiment. Not facts, not formal critiques. Sentiment. In Hollywood, sentiment is everything. Hollywood runs on perception, on the whispers, on the temperature in the room. on the feeling executives get after seeing how the industry reacts to a name. And that night, the feeling was shifting fast. The liaison returned to Amazon MGM and reported exactly what he heard backstage. Not just one or two negative comments, but a consensus. A collective breath of hesitation. A sense of dread mixed with exhaustion. A tone that said, "We don't want to deal with her." That was the first time Meghan's name was uttered in the same sentence as the dreaded phrase. She's a high-risk, low-reward asset. But what does that actually mean? Let's break it down. High risk means unpredictable public behavior, volatile press coverage, frequent scandals, divided audiences, costly PR management, unpredictable backlash, fear of production shutdowns, fragile relationship with the media, potential for lawsuits, brand instability. Low reward means unreliable audience draw, inconsistent engagement, inflated self-perception of market value, lack of box office history, no proven leading role success, no guarantee of increasing subscriptions, potential to alienate existing viewers, high maintenance with minimal return. It is the worst combination a studio can calculate. Worse than a scandalous celebrity, worse than an inexperienced actor, worse than a controversial figure. High risk, low reward is the Hollywood equivalent of a giant flashing sign that says, "Do not invest, do not attach, do not bet on this." And those words were quietly being attached to Meghan in meeting after meeting as Amazon MGM's leadership regrouped. Because after Fallon's joke went viral and the backstage whispers spread across social media in coded references and insider tweets, Meghan's name shifted categories. She was no longer a potential comeback star. She was becoming a PR hazard. Amazon MGM held an emergency sentiment analysis review. Yes, that's a real thing. Large studios use data teams to monitor public reaction, trending narratives, fan engagement, and audience tolerance levels. And what they found was worse than they expected. Every time Meghan's name appeared online, the comment section split into war zones. Supporters defending her, critics mocking her, casual viewers rolling their eyes, industry insiders posting cryptic jokes, Reddit threads melting down, TikTok creators posting reaction videos to Fallon's joke, Twitter analysts predicting Amazon MGM's regret in advance. But the most damning metric was one Meghan never knew studios tracked: drop-off rates. This is the percentage of viewers who click away, lose interest, or skip ahead the moment a specific celebrity appears on a screen. Meghan's drop-off rate was alarmingly high, higher than most polarizing figures, higher than some scandal-ridden stars, higher even than celebrities currently in legal trouble. Why? Because Meghan didn't just divide audiences. She exhausted them. Viewer fatigue is real, and Meghan triggered fatigue in more viewers than she triggered excitement. Amazon MGM executives looked at that data, then looked at her demands for creative control, then looked at the potential for backlash amplified by Fallon's viral joke, and began asking the question no studio wants to ask mid-negotiation. Is this worth it? The answer was leaning toward no. But Meghan had no idea. She believed her Amazon MGM project was still on track. She believed Fallon's joke was just a fluke. She believed the viral moment was a small PR hiccup. She believed she still had leverage. She believed her royal name still carried weight in Hollywood. But Hollywood wasn't buying it. Let me ask you something. Have you ever watched someone walk into a room thinking they had power, while everyone else was quietly calculating how to distance themselves from them? That was Meghan's position now. She was negotiating from weakness while believing she was negotiating from strength. She talked about artistic freedom. They talked about damage control. She talked about narrative integrity. They talked about crisis management. She talked about audience impact. They talked about audience loss. Contradiction stacked upon contradiction. Hollywood executives don't speak directly at first. They speak in code. They say things like, "We're reevaluating the timeline." Or, "Let's revisit this at a later stage." Or, "We're looking at alternative configurations." Phrases that sound gentle but mean danger. Meghan didn't speak this language. Her team either didn't understand the signals or pretended not to. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Amazon MGM's legal department had already begun drafting alternate contract structures, backup plans, hard exit options, soft internal memos advising against premature announcements. But the real blow came during a private phone call between two top Amazon MGM executives, the call that solidified Meghan's new label. "I'm not putting my name on this project if she loses it halfway through," one executive reportedly said. "Lose it," the other repeated. MHM. "She's emotional, reactionary, sensitive. She doesn't take jokes. She doesn't handle criticism. She might walk out mid-production. Or worse," the other said quietly, "she might explode in public again." How many times can we clean up after someone before it becomes our brand problem? Silence. Then the final phrase that sealed everything. "She's high risk, low reward." And once those words entered the executive vocabulary, Meghan's project became an uphill battle. Because high risk, low reward actors get one of two results. They get minimized, or they get replaced. Meghan's team began noticing subtle changes. Amazon slowed communication. Emails became briefer. Calls became more formal. Requests for updates became less frequent. Deadlines became flexible, too flexible. Approvals that once came quickly now took days. Concerns that weren't concerns before suddenly needed further discussion. Tension, confusion, a sense of slipping control. But Meghan still believed she could redirect the narrative. She still believed her public statements could repair the situation. She still believed her Hollywood status was intact. She still believed her comeback was inevitable. She didn't know that Fallon's joke had shaken the studio. She didn't know that audience testing numbers were tanking. She didn't know executives were losing confidence. She didn't know agents were quietly warning their clients not to attach to her project. She didn't know the Whisper Network had already decided her reputation wasn't worth the risk. But the worst part was still coming. Because Amazon MGM was not done investigating. They needed more data, more clarity, more confirmation of whether Meghan was a viable investment. So they called for deeper research, more audience testing, more PR modeling, more internal reviews, more executive input. And in one of those meetings, one that Meghan never knew happened, an analyst presented something devastating. He revealed the true cause of the low-reward label. And it had nothing to do with acting talent. It had nothing to do with royal baggage. It had nothing to do with controversy. It was something far more surprising. Something that caught even the studio executives off guard. Something that explained everything. And what the analysts found next would change the entire trajectory of Meghan's Hollywood comeback. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What if the real reason Hollywood began backing away from Meghan Markle wasn't rooted in the controversies, the headlines, the lawsuits, the royal tension, or even the Fallon joke that ricocheted around the internet? What if the most devastating blow, the one that truly cemented Meghan's status as high risk, low reward, came not from executives, not from producers, not from studio insiders, but from ordinary people? From everyday audience members who had no agenda, no bias, no industry calculations, just raw, honest reactions? Because that's what Amazon MGM discovered next. And it was worse than anything they expected. Audience testing. 2 words every studio relies on. 2 words that can make or break a project. 2 words that Meghan never thought would be used to evaluate her. And yet those 2 words were about to determine everything about her Hollywood comeback. You see, after Fallon's joke went viral, after the backstage whispers turned into circulating industry murmurs, Amazon MGM had a decision to make. They could either trust their gut or trust the numbers. And big studios don't gamble on gut feelings when millions of dollars, reputations, and global rollouts are on the line. They wanted numbers. They needed numbers. They demanded numbers. So Amazon MGM launched what the industry calls a stealth sentiment test. A controlled experiment where audiences are shown short clips, mock trailers, concept art, or even just names and descriptions of potential projects, and are then asked to provide their immediate reactions. Studios run these constantly, but rarely, very rarely, do they use them to evaluate a single actress before a project is even greenlit. Meghan was the exception. The studio needed confirmation before moving forward. The first round of audience testing was simple. They didn't show Meghan's face. They didn't show footage. They didn't show scenes. They showed only her name, paired with brief sample concepts similar to the pitch she presented. And the results stunned executives. When Meghan's name appeared on screen, interest dropped. Significantly. Not everywhere, of course. She had supporters. But the drop-off was measurable, sharp, and consistent. For every positive reaction, there were multiple negatives. And the most dangerous category of all, the neutral viewers, were disengaging. Neutral viewers are the people who keep Hollywood functioning. They aren't fans. They aren't haters. They aren't activists. They aren't royal followers. They're the casual watchers. The ones who tune in because something looks interesting. If neutral viewers lose interest, the project bleeds. And Meghan was losing them. But that was only the beginning. In the second round of testing, Amazon MGM showed mock scenes with the description of Meghan as the lead protagonist. They didn't use